Day, columnist at the Mail on Sunday, and get some common sense back onto the show. Peter, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Good to see you. You're writing today about Hiroshima. Obviously, yesterday was the anniversary of that dreadful day, and you asked the question: was the USA right to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima 80 years ago? As ever, it's one of those questions that you immediately go, "Well, of course," and then you go, "Well, I don't know," and that's kind of where we are, isn't it?
The difficulty is, I think, for a lot of us who lived through the supposed nuclear terror period of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we learnt to love the bomb because it appeared to be keeping the peace.
Yeah.
But now we still have major powers with the bomb and no peace, and in fact, war breaking out like a horrible epidemic in both Ukraine and Iran, and who knows where next. Unprevented by it. So the argument, which used to be quite effective for me, that it had maintained a balance of terror and so kept the world safe, doesn't seem to be working anymore. And then you look back at the actual event, and at the time, the American authorities suppressed for many years the publication of pictures of what had actually happened in Hiroshima after the bomb had been dropped, because it was so awful. Yeah. And it is a terrible thing. And what I'm writing about is really a very interesting piece of scholarship by a Japanese American who also is a Russian speaker, who looked into the whole business of the Japanese surrender, and is pretty much sure that they didn't surrender because of either the Hiroshima or Nagasaki bombs, but because the Soviet Union joined in the war. And that would take away the last prop, really, from the argument that we should have used it. And I think it's certainly interesting that people should consider this, because we have a lot of thinking to do about how the world is to be kept at peace over the next few years. Yeah,
because I was listening to somebody once, we were talking about the likelihood of Vladimir Putin using any kind of nuclear bomb, and there's talk of, what they call tactical nuclear weapons, and the guy that I was talking to about it said, tactical nuclear weapons sounds like something that wouldn't be a bad thing. However, the tactical nuclear weapons that Putin would use would actually be bigger than what was dropped on Hiroshima.
Well, that's true. Almost everything would be bigger than that. But there is another aspect of nuclear weapons which people don't think about enough, which is electromagnetic pulse, which doesn't involve any fireballs or any radiation sickness. It involves an explosion high in the atmosphere, which wipes out absolutely everything electronic. It would take this station off the air. It would close down your office and mine. It would make the power stations cease to function, and every motor vehicle stopped working. The Russians certainly used to, and I visited many years ago now a park south of Moscow full of old steam locomotives, which they kept in case electromagnetic pulse was used against them, because steam locomotives are one of the few things which would keep transport moving. If that happened, you'd basically be reduced to steam engines and bicycles. And it would be a serious setback for any civilization against which it was used. It's not impossible to use nuclear weapons in this way. And if it did, it would be very, very serious indeed. People should not be relaxed about it. When the Russians start using these threats, it might be wise to consider the possibility that something of this kind might happen if it goes on. There is a great urgency, it seems to me, in finding a way out of the Ukraine war, for a start.
Yes, I mean, certainly.
It doesn't involve expanding it, and so many people seem to want to either keep it going forever or expanding it, or doing things that will expand it. And I don't quite know who that's going to benefit, but it certainly would put this country in a certain amount of danger.
Well, it would, I think, and that's why hopefully they'll find some way to bring it to an end relatively soon.
One really does hope. And so many young men have been killed and maimed, and awful things happen in Ukrainian cities night after night, in civilians dying, and the hateful business both in Gaza and Ukraine of civilians being killed in warfare, effectively deliberately, because the people who launched the missiles and dropped the bombs know perfectly well that civilians will die, even if they're not directly targeting them. It's a horrible form of warfare, and some way must be found of stopping it, I think.
I think so. Let's talk about the front page of the Daily Mail today. HMRC staff hold classes on guilt of being British. I mean, this is probably one example of many that you could find if you went, sort of poking around inside the dark recesses of the civil service. But it's a very kind of good indication of what's gone wrong with the state in this country, isn't it?
It is, isn't it? And the caricature level, they were actually being propagandized from home as well. They didn't have to come into the office.
Yeah,
They
of
could
course.
they could link up on Zoom and be told how terrible Britain was. I have to say, and when I eventually got through to HMRC on the phone, which I've become quite practiced at doing, you also listen to a lot of really terrible music. The people
Yeah.
you get through to are often rather nice. I have no complaints about them when you get through to them, but it is very difficult to do. And
Yes.
it's obviously an organisation in crisis. But this business of telling people how awful Britain is has a very, very long pedigree. And when I wrote my book, The Abolition of Britain, back in 1999, I found there'd been a sort of movement among history teachers to try and deconstruct the old-fashioned patriotic history which we used to be taught and turn it into something else. It's a key part of the Cultural Revolution to persuade people that this country has a wicked past and should be guilty all the time. And it performs a similar function to the education in Marxism and Leninism that communist countries used to impose on everybody. And this wasn't just at school. Wherever you were at work, you would have to attend these lectures and indeed pass examinations. In fact, Angela Merkel, who became Chancellor of the whole of Germany, when she was an East German actual professional scientist, she had to attend these lectures and was caught reading something else while doing so and got into quite serious trouble.
Right.
It is a feature of dogmatic societies that people are constantly badgered with lies about politics to try and get them to fall into line. And even if you don't believe them, even if you, in some cases, know them not to be true, it's dangerous to resist. You get marked down. And that's half the purpose of propaganda, to tell people how powerless they are against the new regime. But we have the thing that people need increasingly to grasp. We have had a revolution in this country. New people are in power. But the fact that they don't send anyone to gulags or shoot them doesn't mean that they aren't very ruthless about enforcing their power and their ideas. And this is one of the ways in which they do it.
Right. Well, whenever you see statistics on what's actually going on in this country, you do find that you're absolutely right, that there's so much that's being withheld from us. I mean, I found out because of the Epping protest and over in Epping Forest at the Bell Hotel, that it turns out the Essex police are arresting somebody, I think it's on statistics, only 1.4 a day for some kind of hate crime. You know, as opposed to actually, and this morning we learned in a Telegraph that at least 200 people living in asylum seeker hotels have been charged with criminal offences this year without police revealing their immigration status. You know, and you suddenly, the more you look into this stuff, the more you realise that the state is keeping things from us at quite a high level.
Well, yes, and also the police have been another key part of this revolution. The police used to enforce the very commonly held ideas that most of us still have. That it is wrong to steal and wrong to kill and wrong to attack people and hurt them without provocation, and that was what they did. And they tried to prevent these things from happening. And then, if they did happen, they then pursued the people responsible and got them prosecuted. That's not their function now. Now they believe they're some kind of paramilitary social workers trying to enforce the beliefs of left-wing people who actually still maintain that crime and disorder are caused by bad conditions and child abuse and things of that kind, not by human wickedness. And at the same time, they've taken on the job of enforcing this new ideology, the whole idea that particularly on masses of mass immigration or sexual politics or anything else, there are certain things which can no longer be said, and they are becoming a political militia. And it took me years to begin to persuade people that this thing had happened, because the police had still a reputation built up over the whole of the 20th century, really, of being the friends of the public. And they looked roughly the same. And people would say, oh, come on, you're just being unfair. There are lots of decent police officers. I said, well, there may be lots of decent police officers, but I don't know what it is they're doing or where you can find them, because the ones I'm always reading about or encountering are not like that at all. It's a wholly different organization. And if you were to try to reverse this revolution, one of the key things you would do would be to build a new police force on the old principles which it used to operate on. And when that was ready, you would disband this lot as quickly as you could, because they're a menace. They're simultaneously pathetic in the face of crime and sinister.
That's true. Let's finish with Lucy Letby, the documentary that you wrote about and that you've certainly seen several times. Came out at the beginning of this week. A lot of people saw it and sort of agreed, at the very least, with the idea that there should be a retrial.
I think the dial is beginning to swing a bit. People are beginning to realise on a large scale when a major terrestrial channel does a program of that kind, and it was a superb program, I have to say, but very, very responsibly and thoughtfully put together, interviewing some very powerful witnesses. And I recommend anybody who hasn't seen it, you can watch it on ITVX without any difficulty. I noticed the other day that the program Loose Women had come out, largely the panel had come out largely in favour of reopening the case as well, which is another big sign, I think, of the dial swing. People are beginning to realise that something has gone seriously wrong. That you don't need to believe that Lucy Letby is innocent. I don't know whether she's innocent or guilty. How could I know? All you need to believe is that the trial was unsatisfactory and she wasn't satisfactorily convicted, and it really ought to be looked at again. And if at the end of it it turns out that solid evidence is produced that she is guilty, well then that's resolved. But at the moment, there's too much doubt to keep her in prison on what is effectively a slow motion death sentence. So here she is, a very important age in her life, being confined and told that she will never leave prison. Now, if she's guilty, well, so what? Why should anyone worry about that? But if she's not guilty, that is such a terrible thing that any civilized society must surely at least examine the danger that this is so, and what harm can be done. I've always said this to those who say to me, well, I think she's guilty. I say, you may be right. I have to constantly be aware that people who disagree with me may be right. But if you are right, let's have it proved beyond reasonable doubt rather than have it in the state of doubt it's in at the moment. That's all we're asking those of us who campaign in this matter.
Yes.
To have it sorted out so that we know one way or another whether this conviction stands.
Well, we'll see whether or not the court system agrees, because up to now they've been pretty,
There's some hope that something like the Criminal Cases Review Commission is looking at it. They may recommend an appeal, but even then, of course, it's as Mark MacDonald, Lucy Letby's barrister, says, it's possible they may just stick to procedure and say, well, it may well be that there is evidence that she isn't guilty, or not enough evidence that she is guilty, but because this could have been raised at her original trial, she stays in jail. Well, that, to me, makes a nonsense of our justice system. If it keeps someone in jail when there's so much evidence that she's not there beyond reasonable doubt, then that's just wrong, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Absolutely right. Peter, good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, columnist at the Mail on Sunday.